Have you ever noticed how the most profound shift in our lives often begins with the quietest moment? We spend our days chasing the horizon, frantic and hurried, only to realize that true transformation happens when we finally stop, when the noise of the world fades into a whisper, and you allow yourself to truly sink into the stillness. Tonight, you are exactly where you need to be. We aren't just listening to a story, we are deconstructing a dream. So, pull your duvet a little closer, let your shoulders drop, and find that perfect, heavy spot of comfort. Let's begin. Imagine, if you will, the life of a man named Laurent. He was a merchant who lived by the pulse of the ocean, a man who had gambled his entire existence on a fleet of ships. But the sea is a fickle mistress, and in one swift stroke of fate, the waves claimed his fortune. Laurent was a widower, spared from breaking the news to a wife, but he returned to a house full of children who knew nothing of hardship. They were 6 in total, 3 sons and 3 daughters raised in the lap of luxury, draped in silks, and shielded from the harsh realities of the world. When the creditors began to circle like vultures, the truth could no longer be hidden. The fine furniture was sold, the carriage was taken away, and the expensive jewels were bartered for bread. They moved from their grand estate to a humble cottage on the outskirts of town. For the 5 eldest children, this was a living death. They were practically adults, yet they remained idle, clinging to the ghosts of their former lives, refusing to learn the simple weight of a broom or the heat of a kitchen fire. But then there was Camille. Camille was the youngest, a soul of steadfast temperament and quiet grace. While her siblings pined for lost velvet, she rolled up her sleeves. She went into the village, not as a fallen noble, but as a student of life. She asked the locals how to bake, how to sew, and how to tend to a garden. Slowly, the wariness of the villagers turned into a deep, genuine affection. Camille became the anchor. She was the one who ensured the cottage smelled of fresh bread and that the hearth stayed warm, even as her siblings struggled to accept their new reality. 2 years passed in this quiet rhythm until a miracle arrived. News reached Laurent that one of his lost ships had finally drifted into port, its cargo largely intact. The family erupted in joy, the elder siblings already spending money they hadn't yet touched. But Camille felt a strange hesitation. She had grown to love their simple life. She had found value in being useful. To reclaim what was left, Laurent had to journey to the city, promising his children gifts upon his return. The elders demanded silks and buckles of gold, but Camille asked only for a Rosanne exotic, impossible beauty that did not grow in their part of the country. Laurent's journey, however, was cursed from the start. Upon reaching the port, he found that his creditors had already seized every ounce of his cargo. He was a man without debts, but he was also a man without a penny. Disheartened and caught in a violent autumn storm on his way home, Laurent lost his way. Thunder shook the earth, and lightning split the sky, driving his frightened horse into an unfamiliar, forbidding forest. It was there, through the lashing rain, that he found a tall stone wall and a massive iron gate standing slightly ajar. Seeking only a roof for the night, Laurent entered the estate. He found a mansion of imposing stone, a place that felt as though it were held under a spell of silence. Inside, the fire was roaring in a cavernous hearth, and a table was set for one driven by hunger and exhaustion. He ate the meal provided by an unseen host and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When he awoke the next morning, the house remained silent, but the mistress of the house was nowhere to be found. Sheepish and desperate to leave, Laurent made his way to the courtyard, where he spotted a pergola overflowing with the most stunning pink roses he had ever seen. Remembering his promise to Camille, he reached out and plucked a handful of blooms. But as the last rose left the bush, the silence was shattered. A fierce, hulking figure appeared, a man who looked more like a beast, bristling with facial hair and towering with a terrifying, muscular build. The being was furious. Offered hospitality, food, and fire. Yet Laurent had repaid him by stealing his most prized possession. "I demand compensation," the beast growled. "Either you return to work off your debt, or someone in your family must take your place." Laurent returned home, his heart heavy with the weight of a terrible choice. He told his children the truth of his ill-fated journey. While the older siblings pouted and worried for their own comfort, Camille stood firm. She announced that she would take her father's place at the chateau. She packed her modest belongings, pressing the wilted rose her father had brought into a book, and set off into the misty, scudding clouds of the unknown. She was nervous, yes, but she was determined to find the humanity hidden within the beastly stranger's walls. Camille stood alone in the echoing hallway, the gray, overcast light filtering through the tall windows, but offering no warmth. The house felt as though it were breathing, a massive, ancient beast made of stone and shadow. She adjusted the ring of heavy keys in her hand, feeling their cold authority. These were her tools now. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was the new mistress of a house that had forgotten what it meant to be lived in. Her guide through this labyrinth was a boy named Gabriel. He was a spark of life in the gloom, a village lad who had seen past the Baron's terrifying exterior. As they walked the long, carpeted wings of the East Wing, Camille felt the eyes of painted ancestors watching her every move. These portraits were the only permanent residents here, and she felt like an uninvited ghost. But when Gabriel opened the door to her bedroom, she gasped. It was a sanctuary of fine fabrics and rich wood, complete with a window seat that looked out over the wild, overgrown gardens. That first night, the silence of the chateau was absolute. Camille sat in the window seat, watching dark clouds scud across a rising moon, eventually drifting into a sleep filled with strange dreams. She saw a large dog lead her through dark halls, only to find a man sitting at a desk, his back turned, perpetually about to reveal his face. When she woke to the morning sun, her new life truly began. Her first meeting with her employer Antoine was a moment she would never forget. He sat in his study, a man consumed by a wilderness of facial hair and a natural scowl. He was an alarming sight, but Camille held her breath and maintained her grace. Antoine was blunt. He was short on help and tired of the neglect. He handed her the keys and gave her a strange freedom. He didn't care how she managed the house, as long as it was done. He spent his days buried in his study, or the library room Camille soon discovered was a masterpiece of human knowledge, with gold trim and rolling ladders reaching towards thousands of leather-bound volumes. As Camille began to work, she realized that Antoine was a man of deep contradictions. The villagers called him a monster, but Gabriel insisted his bark was worse than his bite. Camille started in the kitchen, turning a cold, empty space into a place of warmth and the aroma of roasting chicken. When she sat for dinner with Antoine in the grand dining room, under a crystal chandelier that hung like a canopy of stars, she saw a flicker of the man behind the beast. He spoke of philosophers like Descartes and Socrates, his voice deep and cultured, completely at odds with his fierce appearance. The days turned into a rhythm of discovery. Camille found rooms locked for decades, ladies' chambers, filled with silk dresses and sapphire rings. Frozen in time like a portal to a happier era, she learned of Antoine's past, how he had been a vain, foolish young lord who had squandered his fortune and ignored the suffering of others. He told her of the night he had turned away a beggar woman, only to be cursed by his own vanity. For years, he had been searching for humanity in his books, hoping for a release that never came. But Camille saw what the books couldn't teach. She saw his charity toward the beggars at the gate. She saw his love for the rose bush his mother had planted. Slowly, her perspective shifted. There were moments when she looked at him, and the beast seemed to dissolve, replaced by the image of a dignified, handsome man. She began to realize that the dark magic of the chateau wasn't just on him, it was a veil that only kindness could lift. As the seasons shifted, the iron grip of winter finally began to loosen, and the first delicate green shoots of spring pushed through the thawed earth of the chateau. With the change in weather came a letter that would pull Camille back toward the world she had left behind. Her father, Laurent, wrote with news of her sister's upcoming wedding. He missed his youngest daughter dearly and begged the Baron to grant her a brief leave to join the festivities. When Camille presented the request, she expected a growl of refusal, but Antoine merely looked at her with a weary, sad smile. He told her to go, to take all the time she needed. In that moment, the beast was gone. She saw only a man whose soul was as fragile as the roses he protected. Returning to her village was like stepping back into a faded painting. Her family greeted her with a mixture of shock and newfound respect, eyeing her fine clothes and the quiet confidence she now carried. But as the days passed, Camille felt like a stranger in her own home. Her siblings' petty worries about silken status felt hollow compared to the deep, philosophical conversations she had shared with Antoine by the library fire. She found herself staring out at the horizon, her heart tethered to the silent stones of the chateau. She realized then that home wasn't where she was born, it was where she was understood. But her return to the mansion brought a chilling sight. Disarray had taken hold in her absence. Gabriel met her at the door, whispering that the Baron had sunk into a profound melancholy, refusing to eat or leave the shadows of his library. Camille found him disheveled and broken, his spirit flickering like a dying candle. It was then she realized that Antoine's curse wasn't just about his appearance, it was about the belief that he was unlovable. With the stubborn grace that had defined her life, Camille set to work. She aired out the rooms, polished the neglected silver, and brought the gardens back to life, proving that light could always return to the darkest places. The final test came when Camille's second sister was to be wed. This time, she refused to go alone. Alone, she challenged Antoine to face the world, to step out of his self-imposed prison and escort her to the village. After much resistance, he agreed. Camilla had a fine, modern suit tailored for him, stripping away the moth-eaten relics of his past. On the day of the wedding, as they stood on the village green, the whispers began. The villagers, blinded by their own prejudices, saw only a monster. They mocked him, gossiping behind their hands about the beast and his maid. But Camille had Shin Enoch. In a moment of fierce, sovereign clarity, she stood before the entire village and declared her truth. She told them that Antoine was a better man than any of them, that his heart was a sanctuary and his mind a treasure. She chose him openly and without shame over everyone else. And as she spoke those words of pure, unadulterated humanity, the veil finally snapped. In the eyes of the world, the beast vanished. Antoine stood before them a handsome, dignified man, no longer cursed by his vanity, but healed by the very love he thought he would never find. Back at the chateau, under the glow of the summer moon and the scent of 1,000 roses, Antoine slid a sapphire ring onto Camille's finger. The enchantment was over, but a new story was beginning. They had deconstructed the architecture of a nightmare and rebuilt it into a dream. As the last echoes of the gilded glen fade into the quiet of your room, let your breathing become even and slow. The journey is complete. The roses are in bloom. The sanctuary is yours. You are safe. You are held. And the night is long. Sleep now. Good night. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your night. May you find deep peace and restful sleep. Wishing you the sweetest dreams. If you liked it, please like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.